Hello, good day. Good day, everyone. So, ang akong i-discuss today is under sa chapter 10, Aversive Control, Avoidance, and Punishment. So, this is continuation. So, number 4, experimental on avoidance behavior. So, avoidance learning has been the subject of numerous experiments. So, ang avoidance learning daw is isa sa mga naging subject sa daghang experiment. Now, much of the research has been stimulated by efforts to prove or disprove two-process theory. So, sabotable man siya no na those experiment is mura ginapakuan niya na ang result sa two-process theory. So, isa sa mga experiment dito is ang acquired drive experiment. Acquired drive experiment is in an ordinary avoidance procedure, a classical conditioning of fear and instrumental reinforcement through fear reduction occur intermixed in a series of trials. However, if these two processes which is the classical conditioning of fear, and the instrumental reinforcement through fear reduction. It will make separate contributions to avoidance learning. Through the acquired drive experiment, it should be possible to demonstrate their operation in a situation where two types of conditioning are not intermixed. So, kumbaga, ang acquired drive experiment dili siya i-intermix. Ang dili i-intermix dito is ang classical conditioning ug ang instrumental reinforcement. Goal niya is to intermix. Kumbaga, tan-awon siya one by one. So, basic strategy of acquired drive experiment. So, these are the strategy or ginatawag na to na mga phases. Recently, the procedure has been referred to as the escape from fear or FFE paradigm. Excuse me. So first phase is condition fear to a conditioned stimulus with a pure classical conditioning procedure in which the CS is paired with the US regardless kung unsa iyahang subject. And the second phase of the experiment, the subjects are periodically exposed to the fear-eliciting condition stimulus and then ginaalaw sila to perform an instrumental response para ma-off or ma-turn off ang CS, which is makareduce siya sa fear. So, in the second phase, no shocks are scheduled in the second phase. Again, in the second phase, there is no shock scheduled. So, acquired drive experiment, it is called acquired drive experiment because the drive to perform the instrumental response, which is fear, was learned through classical conditioning rather than being innate. So, example sa innate is such as hunger or thirst. Of course, panganak ta pagawas na tugot mo na dayon ta nagdidiin ta sa tong parents, gihaw dayon ta. Now, ang fear is a classical conditioning daw. So, one of the example of the classical conditioning is ang nakandak na experiment ni John B. Watson. So, according sa iyahang experiment, which is the Little Albert experiment, na, again, conduct ni John B. Watson. So, sorry. So, this experiment conducted and then ang quandary is si Little Albert. So sa kanina experiment, si Little Albert sa first session or sa first part, ipakita siya sa iya ang mga object, different kinds of object. First object is dog, and then the next is rabbit. So sa first sa dog, ipakita sa iya no negative response. So wala siya nahadlok, wala siya nihilak, wala siya nakuratan. Second na object is ang rabbit. So wala pud gihapon siya negative response, no negative response. Like wala pud nahadlok, wala nakuratan, wala nihilak. And then ipakita sa ang pinaka-last ang white mouse. So sa white mouse, wala gapon siya response, no negative response. I mean, no negative response. Then like again, wala siya nihilak, wala siya nakuratan. And actually, sa white mouse siya nagpakita og murag positive na kanang murag response goods, like murag mas favorite niya ang white mouse. Karon sa white mouse, in the second part or in the next, yeah, in the second part, gipakita ang ang white mouse sa yaha kay Little Albert. Then gipaired ang white mouse into a loud bang or loud noise. So every time na ipakita sa yaha, like ipakurad sa yaha ang white mouse, gipair ang loud noise. So karon nakahatag og kanang murag nakuratan ang si Little Albert. So dito na condition siya na mahadlok sa white mouse. So after ato, ipakita og balik sa iya ang familiar object, which is ang dog o ang rabbit. Now pagpakita sa iya sa dog, nahadlok siya. Naghatag siya og negative response. And then gipakita po sa iya ang rabbit, naghatag gyapon siya negative response, which is nihilak siya. At same pod sa white mouse. So mo to naghatag siya kaning negative response because na condition siya nga mahadlok ato kay katong pag-pair sa white mouse ug sa loud bang whenever na every time ipakurat sa iya ang white mouse or giitsa sa iya ang white mouse, nagiparisan pa jud ka ng loud bang, which is nakuratan siya, mo to nahadlok na siya or nagka-create na og fear sa white mouse. Now, from escape from fear or EFF procedure is the independent measurement of fear instrumental avoidance responding. So based on assumption that if fear motivates avoidance responding and if fear reduction is reinforcing, then conditioning of fear and instrumental avoidance behavior should go together. Kay if ang fear makamotivate siya sa organism na magbuhat siya og avoidance behavior. So next experiment is independent measurement of fear during acquisition of avoidance behavior. So additional important strategy that has been used in investigations of avoidance behavior involves the independent measurement of fear and instrumental avoidance responding. So in this approach or in this strategy is based on the assumption that if fear motivates and reinforces avoidant responding, then the conditioning of fear and the conditioning of instrumental avoidance behavior should go hand in hand. Contrary to this prediction, however, conditioned fear and avoidance responding are not always highly correlated. Not correlated siya. Kumbaga, low ang relationship between conditioned fear and avoidance responding. Again, low correlation or not correlated. Low ang relationship between conditioned condition fear, and ang iyahang avoidance responding. The next experiment was extinction of avoidance behavior through response blocking and conditions stimulus alone exposure. So, so if the avoidance response is effective in terminating the CS and no shocks are presented, avoidance responding can persist for a long time. Of course, mas dako ang iyahang or mas magdugay siya if ang avoidance response kay kanang effective ang iyahang pagtanggal sa CS. And then wala po'y shock nga na-present. Walay mga electric shock na presented. Like for example, dito sa shuttle box. So, kaning avoidance responding kay mas maka-persist or it can persist for a long time. And then an effective and extensively investigated extinction procedure for avoidance behavior is called flooding or response prevention. It involves presenting the CS in the avoidance situation without the US, but with the apparatus altered in such a way that the participant is prevented from making the avoidance response. Thus, the subject is exposed to the CS without being permitted to terminate it. It is flooded with the CS. Again, ang flooded is, example niya is kanang sa electric shock. Kumbaga, dili nato siya or wala siya gi-permit. Example na is white mouse, wala nimo siya sa isa ang white mouse gibutang sa shuttle box, then naay kanang murag left to right kumbaga ba. So ang white mouse wala siya gi-permit or ang organism wala siya gi-permit ka maka-cross siya from left to right. Kay imbis mo tabuk siya every time mag-blink og red, naa siya kanang gi-block siya ba kumbaga. Wala nimo siya gi-permit nga cross didto agad. Kumbaga, butang nato maka-cross siya from left to right kay gi-block nimo siya. So, mo to ginatawag na flooded. Next, so flooding procedures has two important components. Getting exposed to the CS without the aversive stimulus. This was clearly illustrated in a classic experiment by Schiff, Smith, and Prochaska. And then blocking access to the avoidance response. So this is illustrated in the study of fear conditioning in college students by Lovie Bond et al. Next is non-discriminated or free operant avoidance. In free operant avoidance procedures, an aversive stimulus is delivered without a warning signal. Again, a free operant avoidance procedures or an aversive stimulus is delivered without a warning signal. Wala naghatag og warning signal. The avoidance response is followed by a safety period during which no aversive stimulus will be delivered. The free operant procedure consists of two time periods: the CS interval between shocks if the instrumental response is not made. Kumbaga, ano ni siya, shock, interval shock. And then, in the R, nakalimut ko sa R, not sure if response and then shock, interval between, tama day, response and then scheduled shock. So, kaning SS is shock and interval shock between shocks. And then RS is response and then shock. Extensive training is often necessary for the subject to make the avoidance response regularly. even with extensive training. Subjects do not avoid all aversive stimuli. So the prince so the diagram of the non-discriminated or free operant avoidance procedure. So kaning non-discriminated free operant avoidance, wala nay signal na hapit na si CS or hapit na si condition stimulus. Again, hiwala ang warning signal. So wala nay signal nga hapit na day si CS. So bali ang CS diri is ang blinking red. Muna siya ang condition stimulus. Now, ang kaning object or ang kaning organism moderisyo sa aversive stimulus, which is ang ang electric shock ang electric shock which is kanang so diretso sa aversive stimulus, which is ang katong electric shock, no? So pero na siya interval para sa ni SS interval, pero ang kani ang yahalang interval is shock and then interval shock na pod. Bali mura gitanggal ang itanggal ang CS, natanggal ang katong blinking red good. So imbis mo man to'y naghatag og condition sila na murag mo go na gud siya ang blinking red. So every time na namulakaw sila, since nawala naman ang blinking red, so mulakaw sila, ang permitin lang naman kon is ma-shock sila kay murag ang kuan ba walay avoidance ba, dili sila maka-response og avoidance. Now mo to siya. The next is demonstrated or a demonstration of free operant avoidance learning. Rate of responding is controlled by length of shock, interval shock, and then response, and then interval shock. Intervals are the more frequently shocks are scheduled in absence of responding. So, the more likely the participant is to learn avoidance response, it will increase the duration of safety produced by response shock interval. So it also promotes avoidance responding safe period produced by each response. So RS interval has to be longer than the interval between shocks that would occur without responding. Um, shock interval shock or shock SS interval efficient free operant avoidance responding requires keeping track of time. So there are no external cues to signal when RS interval is about to end. Internal temporal cues must be used. So kani nagdepende iyang response sa length sa SS ug sa response and shock intervals. So the more na magsigi kag ka-shock, the more pod na mas maka-learn ka or ang organism na or sa avoidance response. So mas the more siya maka-learn sa avoidance response, of course, maka-learn jud ka kay mag-iwas man jud siya sa or i-avoid man niya ang katong electric shock. No? So next is the alternative theoretical accounts of avoidance behavior. In two-process theory, reinforcement for the avoidance response is assumed to be provided by the reduction of fear. This is a case of negative reinforcement. Reinforcement due to removal of an aversive stimulus. Several subsequent theoretical treatments have proposed that avoidance procedures also provide for positive reinforcement of the avoidance response, whereas others have suggested that neither negative nor positive reinforcement is important in avoidance learning. So, so how else can we explain avoidance? First is positive reinforcement through condition inhibition of fear or condition safety signals. According to the safety signal hypothesis, Cues present after the instrumental avoidance response is made signal the absence of aversive stimuli, and their presence can provide positive reinforcement for the avoidance response. So, supporting this hypothesis, introduction of explicit feedback cues following the avoidance response facilitates learning the avoidance response. Further, these feedback cues are effective fear inhibitors and can be effective reinforcers for new responses. So, example is, na-off ang red blinking light, then napulihan og green. Ingana na, ingana na cue. So, after na nga ma-avoid ang instrumental response, na-learn niya ang avoidance response. Gets? Again, ang red blinking is nawala na siya. Bali, bali ang green, ang blinking light is mo ng cue, di ba? So, gipulihan siya og green. So, mo to ang cue niya. So, after ana nga ma-avoid niyang instrumental response, maka-learn siya og avoidance response. So, next is reinforcement of avoidance through reduction of shock frequency. Shock frequency reduction has been presented as an alternative to the two-process theory. According to this hypothesis, the reduction of shock frequency is critical to the reinforcement of avoidance response. However, several studies have shown that subjects can learn to make avoidance response even if the frequency of shock delivery does not decrease. So kani mas na lesser iyang na feel sa left, mas na lesser iyang na feel sa kanang kunwari na left and right. So mas lesser iyang na feel dito sa left. Mas wala siya kanang murag lesser ang iyahang, kumbaga na-reduce ang iyahang shock frequency niya dito sa shutterbox. Next, avoidance and species or specific defense reactions. Species specific defense reactions or SSDRs account for an animal's behavior during the first few avoidance training trials. Consistent with this hypothesis, some avoidance responses are more easily learned than others. So every organism na ay specific defense reaction. So kumbaga dili same og reaction tanan organism, no? Example dara is kung lahi ang reaction ni snake or yahang defense reaction, lahi pod kay rat. Next is predatory imminence and defensive recuperative behaviors. So the predatory imminence hypothesis makes the distinction between defensive response, like the freezing, fleeing, aggression, and recuperate, recuperative response. So further, the selection of defense response is based on the subject's assessment of the level of danger. So again, assessment of nagadepende ang yang of the level of danger based on predatory imminence, not environmental configuration. So nagdepende ang iyahang level of danger. Kaning difference ani is defensive, kaning difference ang ilahang defensive behavior. Magdepende sa assessment sa level of danger kung mas higher ang level sa danger. So kumbaga kung mas higher ang level sa danger, mas aggressive ilang defense behavior. I-compare nimo sa lower level of danger, so mas kanang low ang iyahang pagka-aggressive ba kumbaga. So magdepende siya sa iyahang level of danger. And then last one is the expectancy theory of avoidance. The expectancy theory of avoidance holds that the primary cause of avoidance behavior is cognitive threat appraisal, generating expectations of future threat based on previous experiences with aversive events. Kumbaga ba murag expect na nimo ang possible danger. That's why murag mo avoid na ka. Like for example, na-learn na jud nimo na murag let's say kanang sa dog. So na-learn nimo na condition ka na mag-fear sa dog. Like napaakan ka before ba. So since kabalo naman ka murag mag-expect na sorry. So mag-expect na ka ba murag ay hagong threat gud sa imo ha tungod sa imong previous experience o katong whatever katong sa event ka nahitabo. So mo to i-avoid nimo siya mag una siya na kay avoidance behavior. So kunwari kato na nahadlok ka kay namoy ay iro niyong silingan then napaakan na kaato or sa ba naaw-awan so mas nahadlok ka. So instead na moagi na ka dito dapitan na murag linya sa imong silingan, mo shortcut na lang ka sa lain kay kablo naman ka murag mag-expect na ka ba ana. So mao lang to siya guys. Thank you so much for listening. Okay, bye bye.